Did you know that Sonic and Mario have appeared in video games together before prior to becoming world-class Olympic athletes? Did you know that Sonic the Hedgehog appeared in several video games prior to his first game's release? Do you love pointless niche information about franchises that nobody cares about? Well, today is the perfect video for you. Let's talk about times Sonic the Hedgehog appeared in other video games. So the first game on the list is actually Rad Mobile, which interestingly enough is the first appearance of Sonic ever. Sonic's first appearance in a game was actually a cameo. If you look at this game right here, it's like a race car driving game. Look at the thing hanging up next to the rear view mirror. What is that? Yup, it is none other than Sonic the Hedgehog. This game actually released in 1990, which is 1 year prior to the original Sonic the Hedgehog game. A lot of people know about this, but if you didn't, you may have just learned something new. That is the first Sonic cameo. Let's move on to the next one. The next game on the list is The Adventures of Quick and Silva. This was a 1991 platforming game that was for the Atari as well as the Amiga, and there's something extremely interesting about this game. So if you look at some of the enemies that you might fight in it, you will notice one particular enemy right there. And what was that? A blue hedgehog looking thing with red shoes. That resembles none other than Sonic the Hedgehog, where once again this game released on May 10th of 1991, which was about a month and a half prior to the release of the original Sonic game. I wonder how they knew that Sonic was going to be Sega's mascot. So again, yet another Sonic appearance prior to his first game's release. Let's move on to the next cameo. The next Sonic cameo is in Sega Sports Talk Baseball. This was a 16-bit game for the Sega Genesis, which is pretty self-explanatory. It was a baseball game. This game released in 1991 in Japan, just 2 months after the original Sonic the Hedgehog game. And if you look at the billboard in one of the stadiums, you will see Sonic, which closely resembles the same Sonic you would see in the original Sonic game. Lots of references to Sonic 1. Let's move on to the next one. The next Sonic reference can be found in Joe Montana's Sports Talk Football, also for the Sega Genesis. This was long before games like Madden existed and was named after legendary San Francisco 49ers quarterback Joe Montana, who won 4 Super Bowls with the San Francisco 49ers. If you score a touchdown in this game, occasionally you will look up at the Megatron and see Sonic the Hedgehog holding up a flag celebrating with the fans. Sonic was quite the sports fan in the 1990s. Next Sonic reference just might be the most cursed one yet. Jazz Jackrabbit was a 1994 platformer for PCs, which featured your standard 1990s anthropomorphic animal mascot jumping around and trying not to fall to his impending doom. However, there is a super cursed Sonic reference in this game. In the manual of this game, there's hidden Sonic artwork references. In a comic book panel, you will see these words right here. Cripes, I wish life was like those video games where all you had to do to defeat the bad guys was jump on him. Probably a reference to Mario as well. But then you see this disgusting version of Sonic right here saying, somebody get my lawyers on the phone. So it looks like Sonic is going to sue this guy for trying to be a successful anthropomorphic animal platformer in the 90s. I almost feel bad for the game. It had pretty stiff competition because this is the same year that Sonic 3 and Knuckles released, and this is one of the greatest 2D platformers of all time. Even to this day, you could argue it hasn't been topped yet. The next game with a Sonic cameo was called Bug. This was a rail-based 3D platformer created by Real-Time Associates and published by Sega in 1995. The game in and of itself was pretty unique as it tried to make use of the fake quasi 3D technology of the Sega Saturn, but the coolest thing is you actually have a race against Sonic in this game. If you go into one of the bonus rounds in the second stage, it has Bug racing head-to-head against Sonic. Could this possibly be the first time we've seen Sonic in a fully 3D environment? Because if you look, I mean, like, the platforms of the levels are 3D, but obviously it's just a 2D sprite for Sonic. It's actually his Sonic 3 and Knuckles sprite. So this has to be one of the coolest references of all time, and of course this was published on a Sega device, but clearly Bug is not faster than Sonic canonically, right? I don't know, but I think this is actually one of the cooler references we've ever seen. Let's move on to the next one. The next Sonic cameo actually appears in a Nintendo game in the 1990s. I know, this might sound crazy, but did you know that Donkey Kong Country 2, one of the most notoriously difficult 2D platformers and one of the most beloved 2D platformers of all time, has a Sonic the Hedgehog reference? Clearly, the 90s was a crazy time for Sega versus Nintendo as they were heated, bitter rivals in the console business. I'm sure we all remember Genesis does what Nintendo don't. A very iconic time for gaming. If you go into the Cranky's Video Game Hero Awards menu, next to a sign that says no hopers, meaning no hope, and also next to a trash can is a pair of red shoes that are similar to none other than Sonic the Hedgehog shoes. So they think Mario, Link, and Yoshi are better than Sonic, and Sonic has no hope. I gotta say, I do miss when this rivalry wasn't so one-sided. I'm personally more of a Sonic fan myself, but that is probably one of the craziest references of them all. But let's move on to the next one. If you made it this far to the video, thank you, but first, I need to remind you to subscribe to the channel with all notifications. If you want daily Sonic videos, I'll give you a second. And let's get back into the video. The next game is Sega Bass Fishing. This was a game that came out in 1999 and it was for the Dreamcast originally. Almost similar to the Big the Cat fishing minigame in Sonic Adventure 1, but you could actually use Sonic as a fishing lure to help you catch fish. This is what the lure looked like up close, and I gotta say, this is definitely a unique reference. There's no way that the Big the Cat fishing minigame or story was not a tech demo for this game because they both released for the Dreamcast. I'm on to you, Sega. I know what you're up to. Well, let's move on to the next one. The next Sonic cameo is actually from a game that's pretty popular amongst Sonic fans, or at least most Sonic fans know of this, which was in Nights into Dreams. Again, the only reason why I ever knew who Nights was from Nights into Dreams was from the several references and cameos that Nights made in the Sonic franchise, especially the Sonic Adventure pinball level. This game was also developed by Sonic Team, and not only just Sonic Team, like all the original members of Sonic Team, because this game came out in 1996. A demo for the game called Christmas Nights actually featured Sonic with a special level called Sonic into Dreams, which in 96 we got one of our first iterations of a 3D Sonic. And if you look right here, this is pretty much what the game played like, with the charming Sega Saturn graphics, trying its best to do 3D. Sonic had a rough transition to 3D, or like Sonic had a awesome transition to 3D. This was one of the less obscure references as you actually get to play as Sonic. Ironically enough, in the Sonic cameo video, this game actually made a cameo in the recent Tales Tube episode if you look in the bottom left corner right here. Very interesting. Let's move on to the next one. The next Sonic cameo was in a game Layman's 24 Arcade. This game was released in 1997 and it was a Sega racing game similar to Daytona USA. Sonic appears as a playable racer in a red buggy and he's available by entering a cheat code. Could this be the most cursed 3D Sonic model of all time? Maybe in 3D, because let's be honest, the Sonic that appears in Jazz Jackrabbit might be one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen in my life. But anyways, that is Sonic in Layman's 24. Let's move on to the next one. The next game is actually on the Sega Game Gear, and the game is called Sega Game Pack 4-in-1. In the tennis game, Sonic the Hedgehog actually plays referee. Perhaps Sonic liked playing tennis so much that he eventually took up the sport himself, because this wouldn't be the last time Sonic and friends played tennis. It almost reminds me of Mario Tennis 64, where if you look, there's like a blue Mario playing referee, even though there's a regular Mario playing tennis. I guarantee someone's done a video essay on that blue Mario, but that's what Sonic being the referee kind of reminds me of. But that is another Sonic cameo. Let's move on to the next one. The next game that Sonic appears in is called Art Alive, which was released in 1991 for the Sega Mega Drive. It was basically a painting game, and in some instances in the game you can actually place images of Sonic throughout. It was basically an application that allowed you to paint back in the day and paste graphics. Games like this used to be really cool in the 90s, which had basically been replaced by smartphones and tablets and stuff like that. But here's actually the sprite sheet for some of the Sonics that you could select. Clearly it looks like a reference to some of the Sonic 3 and Knuckles artwork and Sonic 1, but it's very cool nonetheless. The next game on this list is pretty interesting because it actually is the first time ever Sonic and Mario were in a game together. And no, it's not Sonic and Mario at the Olympic Games. This game actually came out in the 90s, believe it or not. Mega Turrican was a 16-bit shooter game that came out in 1994 for the Sega Genesis, and honestly, this game's giving me Metroid vibes. Classic, simple, 16-bit shoot 'em up platforming gameplay, but in the beta of this game that was unreleased, there are background tiles of Sonic and Mario in the first stage. Now, these tiles were never used in the actual game itself, but in the beta, for the first time ever, in 1994, you will see an image of Sonic and Mario in a video game together for the first time. Another game where Sonic makes an appearance is Phantasy Star Online, which is a network action RPG from Sonic Team, and in some of the online lobbies, you will see cameo appearances of Sonic the Hedgehog with his Dreamcast model. In some instances, he'll actually follow you around as well, and you'll also see characters like Knuckles and Tails. There's something about seeing Sonic, Knuckles, and Tails in Phantasy Star Online as characters that follow you around and being NPC quest givers is kind of hilarious. Another game where Sonic appears in is a game called Shenmue, which was released in 1999 for the Sega Dreamcast. Throughout the game, you will find little capsules of Sonic toys, and there are toys for several different characters in the Sonic series, based off of the Sonic the Fighters models. You will see toys like Tails, Knuckles, Bark, Bean, and a severely hated character, Fang. Of course, Dr. Eggman, basically all the Sonic the Fighters characters. You could also unlock a Super Sonic character as well, and this is what he looked like. Sega could not resist putting Sonic in some of their other games. The next game Sonic has a cameo in is called Spike Out Arcade, which was released in 1998. It was a 3D fighting game for up to 4 players, and it was never released in the US or ported to any home consoles, and it had a few sequels and spin-offs. In the game, you will actually see little signs of Sonic, who is basically in an SA1 Yuikawa pose. It's actually his classic model. One level also contains a large 3D statue of Sonic as well. So there's a lot of Sonic artwork scattered throughout the walls, as well as a giant statue. That is pretty cool. This game also looks pretty fun as well. The next Sonic cameo might just be the craziest one yet. In the 1990s and early 2000s, one of the biggest crazes was virtual pet simulators, especially the ones known as Tamagotchis. And no, not a Roblox pet simulator that's basically a gambling casino. Seriously, think about it. This stuff was super popular back in this era because that was when the Chow Garden was introduced in Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. There's a reason why this stuff was super popular, and hopefully it does eventually return. But the original Chow Garden, or something that was a huge inspiration for it, was definitely Tamagotchi. But did you know Sonic did a collab with them? Sega Saturn De Hacken Tamagotchi Park is the only Tamagotchi game that was for the Sega Saturn, and it was released on January 29th of 1998. The gameplay looks to adapt the classic Tamagotchi experience to a video game console at a much faster pace, and you can raise multiple Tamagotchi at once. Essentially, what you were doing in this game was raising virtual pets, but one of the virtual pets was an infamous Sonic Tamagotchi that had several different animations. This was your one chance to have a virtual Sonic pet. The now infamous Sonic Chi was a Tamagotchi version of Sonic the Hedgehog. You could attain this character via raising the Sega egg perfectly, which could also evolve into other Sega characters such as Pengo, Opa Opa, Alex Kidd, and Flicky. We're moving slightly past the 90s, so if you want a part 2 of this, please let me know down below in the comments. But the next Sonic game that he has a cameo in, and he's actually somewhat playable, is Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg. Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg was a niche franchise for Sega way back in the day, and you could actually unlock a Sonic egg in the game. Now, it uses something that's similar to like his Dreamcast model, as you see Tails right here. You could unlock Knuckles. There was even Chow, and once again, these are all based off of their Dreamcast models from Sonic Adventure 2, but there were other characters like Knights from Knights into Dreams, Samba de Amigo, but obviously the one we care about the most is Sonic. This might be the coolest one yet, but the next game where Sonic has a cameo in is Virtua Striker 3, which was released in 2001 for the arcade as well as the GameCube. This is the third iteration of Amusement Vision's popular soccer series, and there is a secret FC Sonic team, which is one of several hidden teams in the game. This team stars Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, Eggman, which by the way, Eggman is the goalkeeper, and also there's a group of Chow that are on the team as well. Honestly, if Sonic was a soccer player, he would probably be one of the greatest players in the game. He's probably better than Messi and Ronaldo combined. This game had a lot of cool advertisements for other Sega games, and had advertisements for games like Sonic Advance, Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, and most importantly, it's just really cool to see Sonic and friends playing soccer. I guarantee this team would be undefeated. Look at Sonic go, but there's no doubt that this is something that probably caught a lot of you off guard. But if we're talking about Virtua Striker 3, where Sonic is playable, we also have to talk about Virtua Striker 1, which was obviously the original in this series. This game was released in 1994 for arcade, and if you look at the ball that the players use for the match, zoom in close enough and you'll actually see Sonic drawn onto the soccer ball. So Sonic's roots in Virtua Striker go way back to 1994. And there you have it. That is just some of the Sonic cameos in other video games. If you would like a part 2, let me know down below in the comments. Let me know what your favorite cameo was. Let's talk about times that Sonic the Hedgehog appeared in other games. Make sure to subscribe to the channel with all notifications. I'll give you a second. And let's get into it. Did you know that Sonic the Hedgehog appeared in the first ever NBA 2K game? The NBA 2K games used to be some of my favorite games of all time, and you know, over the last couple years, they've had some up and down releases. Been a little bit mixed, but that's right, the original NBA 2K game, featuring one of my favorite basketball players of all time, Allen Iverson, on the cover, actually had Sonic in the game. Players can create a team called the Hedgehogs, and the logo actually features Sonic holding a basketball, and the home court has a giant Sonic textured onto the floor. If you look right here, it's basically the SA1 Sonic pose, but he's kind of holding a basketball cropped in perfectly. Something I would probably make in Photoshop. I think the only thing that would be cooler is if Sonic was playable in this game. Maybe not as good as the original Shadow basketball game, but nonetheless a very cool piece of history. Let's move on to the next one. The next game on the list is Choo Choo Rocket. This was a puzzle game developed in 1999 by Sonic Team. If you clear all 25 puzzles in the stage challenge mode, normal Choo Choos can actually be replaced with Chow. So not quite Sonic, but definitely a Sonic reference. Let's move on to the next one. The next game where Sonic appears in is Jet Set Radio. This is an OG Sega franchise that has been dormant for several years, but it looks like in the coming years, we'll be getting some type of remake or reboot or something along those lines. But in this game, there are brief references to the Sonic franchise, of course. There is a billboard that features Sonic, but also you can tag graffiti of characters like Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy Rose, Big the Cat, Eggman, and all the characters from Sonic Adventure, because this is around the time that the game came out. And this is pretty dark, but it's been hinted. It's not like like 100% confirmed that this skull right here on this necklace could actually be the skull of Sonic. But let's go ahead and move on to the next game. The next game on the list is surprisingly Spyro Year of the Dragon. This just feels like a time when video games are just a little bit better, you know what I mean? But in this game, there is a very brief reference to Sonic. In the level Crystal Islands, the character Moneybags will say he's a magician and will open the bridge behind him. If the player declines an offer, he will say that you shouldn't anger a magician, and he just might decide to turn you into a blue hedgehog or something. What's next? He might turn him into a red-hatted plumber? I don't know. Let's move on to the next game. Next game where Sonic has a cameo is called Derby Owners Club, which was released in 2000 and it was for the arcade. It's an arcade horse racing simulator created by the Sega AM3 team. And in this game, there's a track called G1 Sega, and it has a large inflatable Sonic balloon on the center of the track, and it's surrounded by spinning rings. Gotta say, this is a pretty interesting Sonic model, but let's move on to the next one. Now, this next cameo is really out there, but it's also really interesting. So, Illbleed was a survival horror game that released for the Dreamcast, and if you look at this ugly monstrosity right here, his name is actually Zodic the Hellhog. Get it? Zodic the Hellhog kind of sounds like Sonic the Hedgehog, and if you look, he has golden rings that are all around the map that are scattered. Obviously, I mean, he kind of bears a resemblance to Sonic, but he's not one-to-one of Sonic the Hedgehog, but it gets a little bit more interesting. Again, when he takes damage, he will lose rings. Obviously, that's a reference to Sonic. But after his defeat, it is revealed that he is a robot, and one of the scientists controlling him in the game is voiced by Ryan Drummond, who was, at the time, the voice actor for Sonic the Hedgehog. And also, you'll notice that he has like a spin dash-like ability. So clearly, it's a play on Sonic. Clearly, it's a cameo. If you think about it, in a way, Zodic is basically like the OG Sonic.exe. Alright, maybe I went too far with that one. Let's move on to the next one. The next game that Sonic appears in is called Sega Gaga, and just wait for this, man. I mean, this one gets a little crazy. This is a role-playing simulation game in which players manage the affairs of a struggling video game company called Sega. I mean, this was around the time they stopped developing consoles, and only a couple years later, they started releasing games like Shadow 05 and Sonic 06. But alright, let's keep going. Sonic appears in this game with other Sega mascots such as Alex Kidd and Amigo, and one of the possible tasks in the game is development of a title called Sonic the Hedgehog. At one point in the game, Sonic appears with tails in the air, and when he drops down, he takes the player on a wild run. He also appears when Alex Kidd was telling a story about being replaced by the blue hedgehog. At one point, the player also fights Sonic. It's pretty cool because if you think about it, the animation style does look very similar to Sonic X in some of those earlier scenes, kind of like that anime style, but this game is like a very self-referential game, but it's cool that Sonic actually appears in it. Let's move on to the next one. The next game where Sonic appears in is called Alien Front Online. This was a Dreamcast game originally released for the console back in 2001, and in the game, players use armored vehicles to fight tense battles in large interactive arenas. It kind of has like that arcade vibe to it. This certainly feels nostalgic, but Sonic, of course, makes an appearance. That's why this game is in the video. If you look in the city level, you'll see some Sega Dreamcast advertisements, but also if you look right here, you see a billboard with a poster of Sonic, but also you'll see Sonic's name with some Yuji Uikawa artwork in the top left corner of the screen. Very cool, but let's go ahead and move on to the next game. The next game on the list is Beach Spikers. Beach Spikers was an all-girl volleyball game from AM2. The final stadium in the arcade mode features a giant Sonic statue with what looks like his SADX model, but who knew that Sonic loved volleyball so much? Also, if you notice where the referee is standing or sitting, you will see Sonic as like the sponsor or whatever with that signature Dreamcast artwork. Very cool. Let's move on to the next one. The next Sonic cameo is from Virtua Cop 3. This is the third iteration of AM2's popular light gun shooting series. You guys have played arcade games back in the day, you know, where you point at the screen and shoot. These were probably some of the most fun games to play in the arcade, but Sonic actually appears in one of these games, and it's no surprise that he appears in a game that's developed by Sega. If you look in the tutorial stage, you will see in the bottom right corner of the screen a little bobble doll of Sonic the Hedgehog with his signature Dreamcast model. It's almost like at this point in time, any game that Sega could put Sonic in, even if it was just for a brief second, he would somehow make his way in. But let's go ahead and move on to the next game. The next game where Sonic has a cameo in is Shenmue 2. This was another Sega game that was for the Dreamcast and the Xbox back in 2001 and was obviously the sequel to Shenmue 1. In the last episode, we talked about how all the Sonic the Fighters models were basically added into this game as like little toys that you could collect, and that feature was once again brought back in the sequel of the game. And if you look right here, you can get a bunch of different toys such as Super Sonic, Metal Sonic, but it's interesting because all these character models were based off of Sonic the Fighters. You had characters like Fang, Espio, Amy, Bark, Bean, but also there was one more cameo in the Moonchild Orphan orphanage, there was a creepy little drawing that resembles Sonic and Tails seen hanging up on the wall. So that's like an extra little cameo, in addition to the little toys that had returned from the first game. But let's move on to the next one. The next game on the list is Virtua Quest, which was a spin-off of the Virtua Fighter series. While it's still a fighting game, it's mostly an RPG, so it's very different than the original Virtua Fighter series. On the Twin Axis server, there is a golden statue of none other than Sonic the Hedgehog. And it's funny enough, even though it's a golden statue, Bit will say the statue has a secret, and after hitting a sequence of buttons, the statue will become supersonic and drop a hunter's badge. So a pretty cool detail and a neat cameo, but let's move on to the next game. The next game on the list was called Feel the Magic, and it was developed by Sonic Team. It was basically like a random collection of mini games. In my opinion, it's something like very similar to the WarioWare series, which is just like extremely odd. But honestly, it had some bangers low-key. But that's what the game was. Basically, just play a bunch of random disjointed mini games in what almost feels like a tech demo maybe for like what the Nintendo DS could do at the time. So I said this earlier, but this might actually be one of the craziest cameos. Not the cameo itself, but the way you activate it. Let me explain. If you start the game with either Sonic Advance, Sonic Advance 2, Sonic Advance 3, Pinball Party, or Sonic Battle in the GBA slot, you can unlock a Sonic hat or a Chow hat for the game's female protagonist. This is what the hat would have looked like, but if you don't own those games, don't worry, you can still get the hat by clearing Hell mode, which is the hardest difficulty setting. All you have to do is make it through Hell. Every day feels like hell. But let's move on to the next one. The next game on the list is Asterix and Obelix XXL2 Mission Las Vegas. Now, the first thing you'll notice on the game is one of the covers features several video game spoofs, one of which being Pac-Man. You see Super Mario from Super Mario Sunshine, as well as on the bottom, you see Sonic. This was an action-adventure game made by Atari in 2005, and there are several video game spoofs throughout. As you can see right here, the characters are throwing what looks to be Super Mario from Super Mario Sunshine. Also, if you look at the walls, it looks very similar to Peach's castle in Super Mario 64. And if you look over here, there's also a Sonic Spring, so that's pretty interesting, but also there is a direct reference to Sonic as well. One of the faction of Roman warriors wears blue headgear that resembles Sonic's quills, along with the trademark red shoes, and they carry gold rings as well. There's no doubt in my mind that that is a direct reference to the Sonic series, so let's go ahead and move on to the next game. The next game is Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast. In this game, you will notice in the casino stage that there are statues of Sonic throughout, and also, like many other Sega games, you will notice that Sonic is featured throughout several billboards throughout the map. It's one of the more subtle ones, and if you're not looking hard enough, you might miss it, but let's move on to the next game. The next game where Sonic has a cameo in is Phantasy Star Universe. Now, this is a game that I used to play back in the day, and I actually really enjoyed it. It was an MMORPG developed by Sonic Team, and they had an event in the game for Sonic's birthday. The game had statues of several different Sonic characters using their Sonic Heroes models, and the funny thing is, in some of the missions, Sonic and friends would actually accompany you. This game did get a lot of hate back in the day, but I definitely enjoyed it, as I'm a big fan of MMORPGs, but let's move on to the next game. The next game where Sonic appears in is actually the Simpsons game. Now, this one is a pretty direct and not so subtle reference after all. They just straight up parody Sonic. In one of the worlds in this game, Sonic appears and he's like a washed up, has-been shell of himself. And he has several voice lines as well. In this scene right here, you will see where he is trapped. He's basically running on a hamster wheel by himself, and he looks kind of depressed. And you'll hear him say several different voice lines. Let's roll the clip.
I used to be so fast. I forget why I hated Eggman so much. Oh, I can't spin anymore. My back. People don't remember, but the 90s were great. That shadow version of me, nicest guy in the world. Misunderstood.
Towards the end of the game, when you're freeing all the video game characters, there's a little cutscene at the end, and you'll see Mario as well as Sonic. Only for a very brief second, but look at that Sonic and Mario. They look absolutely pathetic, but let's move on to the next game. The next game on the list is Sega Splash Golf. This was a game that was released in 2008 for PC, and it's an online golf game from Sega. Pretty self-explanatory, right? Sega Golf, the game where they play basketball. In this game, Sonic and Tails both have cameos where they star as caddies. You might catch Sonic dancing in this game when you hit a birdie. Wow, look at him go, man. He's actually killing it right now. He's cooking. But the game was essentially an online MMO golf game, though, which is pretty unique. There was a Green Hill course in the game, and there was even clubs modeled after Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Dr. Eggman. But let's move on to the next game. Next cameo on the list is Samba de Amigo, which actually is not that obscure, because recently a Samba de Amigo game came out, and they have a Sonic outfit, as well as Sonic songs, Sonic levels, and even Sonic himself. Wow, what a surprise. is. But that's why this isn't that obscure, but this version of this game actually came out in 2008 for the Nintendo Wii. This game was also developed by Sonic Team, so obviously there's no surprise that Sonic was featured in it. In the career mode, once you unlock hard mode, you will unlock Sonic's Challenge, which features a couple different songs, and they take place in Green Hill Zone with Sonic dancing alongside Amigo. The Chow also appear in multiple other levels in the game, and overall it's a pretty interesting cameo, but again, not that obscure. Most people actually know about this, so let's move on to the next one. Another game where Sonic appears in, and this one's pretty crazy, is The Incredible Hulk, which came out in 2008, and it was a 3D platform adventure game based off of the movie. Since the game is copyrighted by Sega, if a player jumps to a random building, they can view a special billboard. And what does this billboard feature? Yes, of course, it is Sonic with some Sonic Channel artwork and artwork from Sonic and the Secret Rings, although it's pretty blurry in this screenshot. Never thought I'd see a Sonic and Hulk crossover, but hey, listen, you might have learned something new today, so let's move on to the next one. The next non-Sonic game that Sonic appeared in is Little Big Planet. Now, Little Big Planet is a puzzle platformer video game which is centered around user-generated content. This game was super popular way back in the day for PlayStation. I remember seeing this game back in the day, and it just looks so cool, and I really wanted it. There are so many add-on skins that players can use to customize Sackboy in the game, who is like the main protagonist. And in 2009, 5 skins from the Sonic series were made available for download. 5 skins that were available were Sonic, Sonic the Werehog, Knuckles, Tails, and Dr. Eggman. This game was like Roblox before Roblox, it looks like. And I gotta say, that Dr. Eggman skin is looking kind of strange, to say the least. Honestly, all of them are. But that is Little Big Planet. Some of you may or may not know about this. I don't think it's as obscure. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the next game. The next game on this list is called Reset Generation. Reset Generation was an action puzzle game developed by Red Lynx and published by Nokia in 2008. For those of you who don't know what a Nokia is, Nokia was a phone company that rose to prominence back in the early 2000s, and they were known for their innovative phones. They basically had like the original smartphones back in the day. I'm dead serious. And they even dabbled into video games as well. Back in the day, they had a Sonic Advance port called Sonic N-Gage for the Nokia N-Gage, so they're no stranger to working with Sonic, but this game is a little different. All the 10 playable characters in this game are parodies of characters from popular video games such as Mario, and if you look at Sonic right here, oh my god, this has to be the most cursed image I've ever seen. Clearly a reference to Sonic the Hedgehog. So that is Reset Generation, so let's go ahead and move on to the next game. The next game on the list is Taiko na Tatsujin. I don't know if I said that correctly, but it's a series of rhythm games created by Namco. There isn't much footage going around, but this game originally released in 2008, and one of the games is set in Splash Hill Zone with Sonic, Dr. Eggman, some Motobugs, as well as some other badniks. So that's a pretty interesting cameo, but let's go ahead and move on to the next one. The next game on the list is R-Tuned Ultimate Street Racing, which was available for arcade back in 2008. This was an illegal street racing game developed by Sega AM2, and the cars in the game can be customized as you see right here. Some of the cars in the game featured Sonic artwork and Sonic paint jobs, so it's a pretty subtle reference. You have Sonic, but you also have the edgelord himself, Shadow the Hedgehog. So we got Sonic and Shadow on the cars. It's always good to see these two going head to head, you know what I mean? Can't wait for movie 3. We'll see what happens with that. But let's go ahead and move on to the next game. The next game on the list is Hatsune Miku Project Diva, which was released in 2009 for the PlayStation Portable. This is yet another music and rhythm game developed by Sega. And you know what? Sonic is their signature IP mascot, so they gotta slap him on everything, because he also has a very brief appearance in this game as well, although not in the way that you think. The Miku's Room feature of the game, one of the obtainable items is a Mega Drive containing the cartridge of the original Sonic the Hedgehog, so they had to throw some nostalgia pandering bait to give a nice little nod to the Sonic fans. Am I right, Sega? I mean, yeah, that's what we gotta do. Did you know that Sonic the Hedgehog appears in Crusader of Centi? Crusader of Centi is an action-adventure game developed by Next Tech for the Sega Genesis. The story centers around Corona, a boy who just turned 14 years of age and must inherit his late father's sword to fight the monsters that threaten the human race's existence. To me, this game looks like a classic Zelda clone, but in the game, you can actually find Sonic the Hedgehog lounging on a little beach chair in this little oasis. He says, "Tis tis, I'm a gallant hedgehog. Don't mess or you'll get burned." For whatever reason, Sonic has no patience, but he's hanging out, you know? That's what Sonic does. Let's move on to the next game. The next game where Sonic has a cameo on the list is Valkyria Chronicles 2, which was for the PlayStation Portable. It was a tactical role-playing game set in the middle of some war. There was a tank with artwork of Sonic from Sonic Channel. Not the most subtle cameo, but certainly one nonetheless. Let's move on to the next one. The next game on the list is called Transform Mice. This was a browser game, and in the shop, players were able to buy hats with quills that were shaped like Sonic and Shadow, and there was a skin based on Tails. There's also an achievement title in the game called Sonic the Mouse. This is a very interesting online flash game, but let's move on to the next one. The next game on the list is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up game based on the popular comic book series and film. One of the power-ups in the game that you can obtain is called Speedy the Porcupine. There's also a cheat code in the game that is the same exact code for the level select in Sonic the Hedgehog 3, which is up, up, down, down, up, 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 up. And not only that, there was a re-release of this game a couple years later on the Nintendo Switch. And if you look right here, there's actually a pose that parodies Sonic's iconic pose from Sonic Adventure. Or maybe it's just a giant coincidence, right? Yeah, I don't think so. Let's move on to the next one. The next game on the list is Fun Run. I don't know if anyone remembers this game, but this was an extremely popular iPhone game from back in the day where you could race against your friends online. It truly was revolutionary for mobile gaming at the time, but in this game, there is a slight nod to Sonic the Hedgehog, because in this game, players can purchase an item called Sanic, spelled S-A-N-I-K, that looks just like Sonic's shoes. I mean, they're basically identical. If you haven't played this game, or if you remember this game, I probably just unlocked a core memory. Let's move on to the next one. The next game in the list is Farm Ocarina. This was a mobile farming game, which, you know, back in the day was like a super popular genre. You think of games like Farmville, which probably even had your grandma as a player on Facebook. However, this game did have a Sonic version in 2012. As Sonic, players can run around and even take a nap, as you can see in the bottom right corner. And there's really not much footage or anything known about this game, but still interesting nonetheless. The next game on the list is Hatsune Miku Project Diva. In celebration of Sonic's 20th anniversary, Hatsune Miku has a Sonic the Hedgehog costume. There's also some Sonic the Hedgehog loading screen artwork as well in this game. Believe it or not, Hatsune Miku wearing the Sonic costume was actually illustrated by legendary artist Yuji Uekawa as well. The game was originally for the PSP. Let's move on to the next one. The next game on the list is Spiral Knights, which was an MMORPG created by Sega in 3 rings, where players would defeat enemies as robotic knights. Metal Sonic has his own costume in the game for people who purchased a copy of Sonic CD on Steam. The costume was also available for in-game purchase in the time as well. There was also an accessory for Tails' as well. As you can tell by the gameplay, it seems like it has some hack and slash elements. It has some pretty simple gameplay. The costumes are pretty cool because they're not necessarily one-to-one copies, but more so inspiration. But let's move on to the next one. The next game on the list is Samurai and Dragons, which is a free-to-play card-based strategic fighting game developed by Sega. So, you know, no surprise that there's a Sonic collab in the game as well. In late 2012, Samurai and Dragons Deluxe Package was released, and it also contained some Sonic the Hedgehog themed cards as well. We gotta look at our boy Shadow. We had Sonic. We also have Dr. Eggman, and there's even a Chow card. How great is that? Let's move on to the next game. Next game on the list is Dengekai Bunko Fighting Climax, which was released in 2014. And you'll notice in the background some Chow. You'll also see Knights from Nights into Dreams, but you'll also see Sonic floating around in the background as well. But this isn't the only Sonic themed appearance in this game. There's also a Green Hill based stage in the game, which is actually based off of its appearance in Sonic Generations. But come on, you can't talk about Sonic without talking about Green Hill. Sonic fans everywhere are probably complaining about this, but let's move on to the next game. The next game on the list is Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. This was a game released for the 3DS, and you also notice that they had Mario and Luigi collabs, but also, interestingly enough, they had a Sonic and the Black Knight themed Sonic skin. The coolest part about all this is that the DLC was actually released in 2014, so it's interesting that they actually based it off of the game years prior, but definitely still cool nonetheless. This wasn't also the last collab that Monster Hunter and Sonic did. As a bonus, a couple of years ago, there was a Monster Hunter Rise collab with Sonic the Hedgehog. Monster Hunter is a Capcom-owned franchise, and basically in the game, you have to like hunt down certain monsters with your friends, and the game in of itself is pretty cool. They have this extremely cursed Tails mount. They have some Sonic-themed skins, but they also have this like mini Sonic in the game as well. I gotta say, the little costume definitely does look pretty cool. The game also features some statues, as you can see right there, and even a supersonic transformation. We also can't forget that there was a Monster Hunter DLC collab in Sonic Frontiers as well. So Capcom and Sega have a good working relationship with each other. Very unique and interesting collabs, but let's move on to the next one. The next game on the list is Monster Super League, which was a 2016 free-to-play mobile RPG. In 2019, there was a Sonic collab where you could be characters like Sonic, you could be Tails, Silver the Hedgehog, and of course, the man, myth, the legend, Shadow the Hedgehog. It's got some turn-based combat. It's basically like Sonic, but in a Raid Shadow Legends type game. And speaking of Raid Shadow Legends, today's video is brought to you by... I'm just kidding, but yo, tell me I didn't just get you right there. Like, tell me that was not the perfect transition. Let's move on to the next game, though. Next up on the list is Persona 5 Dancing in Starlight, which is a spin-off rhythm game featuring the central cast from Persona 5. There was one of the characters in the game that had a weird, creepy little Sonic costume, as you can see right here. So, yeah, Let's move on to the next one. He's freaking me out. Another cool cameo you may or may not have known is that Sonic was actually featured in a Pac-Man game. Well, this might not be as obscure because I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with some of these mobile collabs, but there was a mobile port of Pac-Man and Sonic actually did a little collab. And you could actually play as Sonic in the game with like a Sonic themed Pac-Man skin kind of thing. He was also playable in Sonic Dash as well, so it was kind of like a crossover. Not as obscure, but let's move on to the next one. The next game on the list is Sega Slots, which was a Vegas-style gambling app that employs the use of well-known Sega franchises, hiding a children's mascot behind gambling. How sick and evil! There was some Sonic-themed levels in the game, which kind of reminds me of Sonic Dash a little bit, but they were able to turn gambling into a Sonic theme. It's made by Sega, so it's not that crazy, but let's move on to the next game. The next game on the list is Bubsy the Woolly Strike Back. In the launch trailer of this game, you will actually see Bubsy answering the door to a kid in a Sonic the Hedgehog costume. This game released in 2017 for the PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, and PC. What do you think of the Sonic cosplay? The game in of itself was like a standard 2D platformer type game with some pretty cool visuals. But let's move on to the next game. The next game on the list is Dragon City, a game that originally released in 2012 for Facebook, of course, iOS, and Android. I mean, this just looks like a Facebook game. During its Video Game Island event in 2017, there was a dragon modeled after Sonic. He could do a cool little spin dash in the game. And you know, the Blue Bolt Dragon, or Sonic, or whatever you want to call him, does look kind of cool, but also at the same time, extremely cursed. Let's move on to the next game. The next game on the list where Sonic has a surprise cameo is, surprisingly enough, Super Mario Maker. Who would have thought the first time Sonic and Mario also appear in a platformer together? If the player has the Sonic amiibo, you can unlock the ability to gain a mystery mushroom, which will allow you to transform into Sonic. He has his signature spin dash ability, but you can only play as Sonic if you're playing in the NES version of the game. Would be pretty cool to see him in like the new Super Mario Bros. Style, but this is just about as close as we'll get to Sonic and Mario being in a platforming game together. Unfortunately, unless Sega and Nintendo want to fix that and make the world right. But let's move on to the next one. The next game where Sonic appears in a non-Sonic game is Yoshi's Woolly World. Not shown on the screen right here. This is Sonic Lost World, which had a Yoshi DLC. Due to the Sonic Lost World Wii U exclusivity deal, of course there is going to be some Nintendo collabs. Once again, if you had this amiibo, there's a funny little Sonic the Hedgehog Yoshi skin that you can unlock in the game, which kind of resembles him with the shoes and the iconic blue silhouette. There's also a bunch of other collabs too in this game, so it's not really that crazy, but nonetheless, still a random Sonic cameo. Let's move on to the next one. The next game where Sonic has a cameo is Mario Kart 8, which, you know, in my opinion is one of the greatest games ever made. But there's a Sonic amiibo costume, again, the use of the amiibo with Nintendo, that gives you a little Sonic costume. It's not as cool as, you know, actually being Sonic in the game. Maybe one day Sonic will be playable in Mario Kart, but this will suffice. Let's move on to the next game. Cameos in other games without talking about the LEGO Dimensions Sonic the Hedgehog DLC. This was a LEGO-themed Sonic game that was extremely faithful to the source material. Some argue that this is actually one of the best Sonic games ever made. Look at Green Hill right here. Of course, Green Hill's in the game. We got the iconic Sonic 2 special stages, a remake of Emerald Coast. I mean, it really doesn't get much better than this. We have a Death Egg robot boss battle. The English cast is voicing all the characters in the game. One of the coolest things about this game also is that it was developed by Traveler's Tale. Now, if you know who Traveler's Tales is, they were the original developers of Sonic R. So it's pretty cool to see that almost 20 years later, they got a second crack at making a Sonic the Hedgehog game. And one of the coolest things about it is that it's actually good. We could gush about it more and more and maybe make a separate video about it, maybe do a playthrough. Well, let's move on to the next game. The next game on the list, of course, is Super Monkey Ball Banana Blitz HD, which came out in 2019. One of the characters that was introduced into the game was a playable Sonic the Hedgehog. Obviously, this is a Sega-made game, so it's really not that surprising, again, to see Sonic in the game. And most people know about this, but hey, listen, it's a Sonic appearance in a non-Sonic game. Let's move on to the next one. The next game that has a Sonic the Hedgehog reference is actually Grand Theft Auto 5. So one of the stores, if you look right here, says Super Sonic, the ultra-fast ring specialist. I mean, who goes Super Sonic, who's ultra-fast, and who collects rings? It's none other than Sonic, okay? The next game where Sonic had a cameo in was Angry Birds Epic. Now, this isn't the new Angry Birds collab. If you look right here, Sonic the Hedgehog was playable for a cross-promotion event in Angry Birds that wanted to cross-promote Sonic Dash, and it was like a turn-based RPG game. They had some Seaside Hill level themes. Obviously, they had Sonic in the game. Sonic was also playable in Angry Birds 2 during this time. And as you know, in the modern day, Sega purchased the Angry Birds franchise, and there was more collabs, but we'll get into that in another episode. Did you know that Sonic made an appearance in old-school RuneScape before? Well, kind of. Old school RuneScape is one of the greatest and first ever MMORPGs created. It's a game that's filled with many life lessons. As a matter of fact, here's my character right here. It's, you know, the gameplay objective is pretty simple. You click on things and you go AFK and don't look at the screen. But that's beside the point because they recently just made a Sonic the Hedgehog reference. In a brand new update to the game, they did changes to how the run energy system works. In the caption describing the update, it says, "We're back with game updates kicking off this year with the run energy changes. Gotta go fast, And if you look at the picture graph that they use for the update, you will notice that they have a character that looks awfully similar to Sonic the Hedgehog. Not only did they do a reference to his look, they also did a reference to his famous catchphrase. Probably a crossover you didn't expect, but let's move on to the next one. The next game on the list where Sonic has a collab is Phantasy Star Online 2, which was published and developed by Sega. This game is an online role-playing game, and in addition to costumes and hairstyles, you also had a Sonic mask. But that wasn't the only thing that they included in this game for the Sonic collaboration. They also included emotes for Sonic and Tails. Not necessarily surprising that there's a Sonic collab in a Sega game, but let's move on to the next one. The next game on the list is Persona 5 Strikers. Now, this is once again a game under the Sega umbrella, and in this game, there is an accessory that's called the Sonic Socks. In addition to that, there's little text that says socks that let you run fast as a hedgehog. This essentially means that everyone should own a pair of Sonic socks so they can run as fast as Sonic. Sega, please hire me to sell your merch. Next game on the list is called Q2 Kotoba RPG. Sorry if I did not pronounce that correctly. In this event, they had a collaboration for the Sonic the Hedgehog movies, and they had probably one of the best looking designs of movie Sonic that we've ever seen in this like cartoon version. In addition to the fact that there was a movie Sonic collab, there was also a game Sonic in this game as well. But let's move on to the next one. The next game on the list that did a Sonic collab is called Chain Chronicle. This was a tower defense RPG game that was by Sega, and as part of Sega of Japan's promotion for the Sonic movie, Sonic was added as a playable character back in 2020. While the gameplay of the game is relatively simple, as it's like a simple tower defense game, it did feature some cool artwork from Yuji Uekawa, but I wouldn't say there's really that much else to it. Next game on the list is Puyo Puyo Quest, which was actually released in 2013 for Android and iOS. This wasn't the first time that Sonic has done a collaboration in this game, and surprise to no one, it's also owned by Sega. It's a very popular puzzle game that kinda, at least in my opinion, looks similar to Tetris. But in 2020, there was an event where they did a collab with the Sonic movies. They added movie Sonic as a playable character in the game, and we also got this really cool 2D drawn art of movie Sonic. I think it looks really good. It's pretty interesting. Whenever they translate the realistic movie Sonic into that 2D art style, they seem to always knock it out of the park. But let's move on to the next game. The next game on the list where there's a little Sonic cameo / reference or whatever you want to call it is Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. Given the amount of influence that the Dragon Ball series has on the Sonic series, it's pretty interesting to see the tables turn a little bit and watch Dragon Ball make a reference to Sonic. In the new Dragon Ball Sparking Zero game, there are several dialogue references to Sonic Adventure 2, one of which is when one of the characters are being described as Goku's shadow.
This Saiyan bully looks just like Goku, but they're not even remotely related to each other.
So he's like the shadow to Goku? Well, don't confuse them and accidentally give this creep a hug.
And specifically making sure to point out that you should not accidentally give this character a hug, which is a reference to when Amy gave Shadow a hug in Metal Harbor because she mistook Shadow for Sonic. And that was not the only reference to the legendary and iconic Sonic Adventure 2. There was another reference when Goten is selected to fight against Gotenks. Here's the dialogue. Does it sound familiar?
I found you, faker! You don't even look like me! Hey, you big faker! I'm gonna make you eat those words! Don't you know who I am?
Yes, that is a direct reference to the iconic battle between Sonic and Shadow in Green Forest. Let's move on to the next game. Next game where we get a Sonic cameo / collab is called Fortress Saga, which was released in 2024 for iOS and Android by Monster Burger Studio. Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Shadow appear as unlockable playable characters in the Idol Battle mobile game. In addition to that, Dr. Eggman also appears in this game as a boss battle as well, and there are costumes based on Amy and Silver. Another game where Sonic has a cameo is Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble. It's no surprise that Sonic is usually snuck into the Super Monkey Ball games. It's kind of like a fixture at this point. In the last Super Monkey Ball, you were able to play as Sonic and Tails, but now we have pretty much the entire Sonic Superstars cast, which features a 3D model of Tails, Knuckles, Amy, and Sonic. But if you thought that wasn't enough, there is also a brand new playable Shadow costume skin. It's not classic Shadow because he doesn't exist, but I can now wear a Shadow costume. This is to celebrate the year of Shadow, and it's available with the Sega Pass, and while it's not classic Shadow, it's still pretty adorable. The next game on the list is Super Mario RPG. Now, they remade this game in 2023 when Nintendo shocked the world by releasing 3 Mario RPGs in like basically the span of a year. In the original version of this game that released back in the 90s, there was a little Easter egg that referenced Dr. Eggman. There was a bunch of references to video game characters such as Samus from Metroid, Link from the Zelda series, and Starships from the F-Zero series. But the thing is, these are all Nintendo-owned IP, so it's pretty interesting to see that in the booster tower, you see a figure that looks just like Dr. Eggman. So this was present in the version from the 90s. It's also present in the brand new 2023 remake. Let's move on to the next game. The next game on the list is Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name. Another Sega-owned IP. In this game, you can actually go into an arcade and play working version of Sonic the Fighters on the arcade machines. It's a game within a game. One of the things that I always found to be really cool, it's kind of similar to when back in the day in the original Animal Crossing for the GameCube, you could actually go to the store and buy working NES ROMs from Tom Nook. And then Nintendo took a page from Tom Nook's book and was like, wait, what if we could sell you an online service where we give you like 1 ROM every other month? You know, you gotta love the consistency. It feels like things come full circle. The next game on the list is Ninjala. This game kind of looks like a version of Splatoon, but you're like a ninja. But the game had a huge Sonic the Hedgehog collab where there were several Sonic themed items. You had avatars for Knuckles. You had avatars and like little costumes for characters like Tails. There was also Sonic stickers available that you could use as like emotes. And there was also a Dr. Eggman costume as well. But let's move on to the next game. The next game on the list is one of the most famous Sonic collabs of all time, and that is Sonic in Fall Guys. Fall Guys was a game that took the internet by storm when it first released, and they did a Sonic collab that featured several different Sonic skins, including the original gang and Super Sonic. But we can't forget that Dr. Eggman was also in the game as well. There was a couple of Sonic themed modes, obviously the Sonic characters, and I guess the collab was so popular that Sega said, yo, Fall Guys, let me see your homework real quick, and yeah, they just released their own Sonic Fall Guys. I wonder how that news went with Epic Games after Sega collabed with them and then turned around and then made their own Fall Guys with Sonic characters. But yeah, Fall Guys was basically like the original OG platformer racer battle royale game, and I gotta say, it was definitely fun while it lasted, but regardless, excited for Sonic Rumble in the future. The next game on the list is Panic Porcupine. It's a fast momentum-based platformer game, similar to the 2D classic Sonic games, which is what it's inspired by. The main villain of the game is also inspired by Dr. Eggman, and if you look at the porcupine himself, look at the way he jumps, by the way. He's also inspired by Sonic. What's also pretty hilarious is that Sonic can also be seen in the game's intro in a picture frame where he looks like a humanoid Giga Chad. The next game on the list is probably the most famous of them all, and that is Minecraft. A couple of years ago, there was a Sonic Minecraft DLC, which featured many different Sonic characters, textures, and worlds that you can play in Minecraft. And even recently, there was also something called the Sonic Minecraft add-on that was added to the game, which I'm not really sure what the difference is between that and the Sonic Minecraft DLC. I'm genuinely confused about this. They literally dropped it the other day. It's called Minecraft Sonic Add-on. So I don't know what's different. Maybe they added a couple of different textures and things that you could do. Maybe you have to own the original Sonic Minecraft DLC. Maybe there's different objects, but yeah, allegedly there's also a brand new Sonic Minecraft DLC add-on or whatever. As far as what the difference is between the original version, not sure. You guys can let me know down below in the comments. The next game on the list is Puyo Puyo Tetris 2. So Puyo Puyo Tetris 2 did a Sonic collab, and Sonic also has voice lines in this game by Roger Craig Smith. A lot of people think that these are some of his best voice lines ever as the character in this game, with some really cool and distinct artwork. I told y'all, Tetris and Puyo Puyo are definitely very similar. That's why they literally did a collab. The collab did also feature some other Sonic avatars that you could select from, but let's move on to the next game. Next game on the list is Pizza Tower, which is a fast-paced 2D platformer inspired by the Wario Land series, where Peppino Spaghetti must face the Pizza Tower in order to save his restaurant. He also has some similarities to Sonic as well, as you can see him rolling here, and also his running animation. But there's a character in the game called Snick the Porcupine, which is a spoof on Sonic the Hedgehog. Snick the Porcupine is not actually playable in the game, but he does make numerous cameos throughout the actual game itself. But let's move on to the next game. The next game on the list is Forza Horizon 5, one of the few games that Xbox still makes these days. It's an open-world racing game set in Mexico, and in the Hot Wheels Academy, there's an expert rank mission named Green Thrill Zone, which is clearly a pun on Green Hill Zone from Sonic. Let's move move on to the next game. The next game on the list is Easy Grow Obby, Obby but you can't jump, Skateboard Obby, and Obby but you're on a bike. These are 4 generic Roblox Obby games that somehow were able to score a collab with Sonic Movie 3 on Roblox, despite there already being an official Sonic game on Roblox. So there was a 4-game crossover that allowed you to unlock Sonic UGC if you completed all of the events. The events featured these exclusive 3D models of the Sonic Movie characters and also displayed several Sonic Movie advertisements throughout. Once you played one, you played them all because the gameplay is pretty similar. I did find the Obby on the bike game to actually be pretty fun because it is a pretty unique take on the typical generic Roblox Obby, but let's move on to the next game. The next game on the list that has Sonic cameos is the Henry Stickmin Collection. This game is a collection of point-and-click adventure games, and in the series, there's a ton of Sonic references. As you can see on the screen right here, there is a character that references Tails. Also, you can get the speed shoes in this game, which gives him the similar running animation to Sonic. There's even one part of the game where he tries to go Super Henry, but unfortunately is destroyed by the rays. And it says you need 6 more emeralds before you can turn into Super Henry. The next game on the list is Balan Wonderworld, which is certainly a game. But this game almost has its fate intertwined into Sonic. Not because it's a poorly received 3D platformer. No, that's not why people intertwine this with Sonic. That is because the game was directed by Yuji Naka, and Naoto Oshima also worked on the game as well. These two are credited for helping create Sonic the Hedgehog. So naturally, in this game, there are some references to Sonic. One of which would be one of the main characters of the game hitting something similar to the Sonic Adventure pose. Also, another Sonic reference in this game, when the main character Balan runs, he does that little figure 8 or circular running motion that Sonic does as well. The next game on the list is Ulala Idol Adventure. It's an idol RPG set in the world of Ulala. The trailer for the Sonic collab even featured an extremely cool CGI Sonic with like the movie lightning effects. There were Sonic themed levels where you could actually play as Sonic himself, some Sonic costumes that were available for the avatars, and this was done to celebrate the 30th anniversary for Sonic. A little fun fact, back when this trailer released, we were going through the Sonic drought, so the CGI trailer was like some of the most Sonic content that we've gotten at that point. And people were wondering whether this electric effect around Sonic was indicating that some of his movie abilities would actually be making it into the game franchise. The next game on the list is Deltarune, which is an RPG developed by Toby Fox. When Chapter 2 was released in September 17, 2021, an enemy called Mousewheel says the line, "rolling around at the speed of a mouse," which is clearly a reference to Sonic Adventure 2, Escape from the City. The next game on the list is Olympic Games Tokyo 2020, the official video game. This is the official Olympic video game of the 2022 Summer Olympics in Tokyo. It was developed and published by Sega, and this costume that you could wear for Sonic the Hedgehog was announced during the Sonic Central that year. It's funny because this is like the realistic version of Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, just with some guy wearing a Sonic costume running around. Let's move on to the next game. The next game on the list is Shin Megami Tensei Liberation DX2. It's a mobile RPG in the Megami Tensei series, and they did a collab with Sonic for once again the 30th anniversary back in May 2021. Fun fact, in this game, Sonic is considered a 4-star demon, which means maybe Crazy Carl from Sonic Movie 1 was correct this entire time. By the way, where is this guy these days? It's like a turn-based RPG fighting game, and overall looks pretty cool, and features the in-game 3D modern Sonic model. But let's move on to the next game. Next game on the list is Fist of the North Star Legends. This is an RPG based off of the popular manga series Fist of the North Star. Back in 2021, once again, this is a 30th anniversary Sonic collab. There was an event where you could unlock Sonic the Hedgehog as a playable character. Once again, one of those like turn-based style kind of games, and also featured a supersonic ability as well, which is also very similar to what his ultimate ability was in Super Smash Bros. The next game on the list is 2 Point Hospital, which is a business simulation game where the player designs and manages a healthcare institution. How fun is that? It was announced during the first Sonic Central that various Sonic-themed items and customization options will be added to the game via a Sonic Pack. Once again, no surprise that Sonic was snuck into this game considering the fact that it was published by Sega, but let's move on to the next game. The next game on the list is Cookie Run Kingdom, which is a mobile RPG and town building game. They did a crossover with Sonic back in 2021 in the special event mode called Sonic's Green Hill. In the game, players could spend power sneakers to play through stages based on Green Hill. Rings could also be collected in the stages as well, and there's even a Dr. Eggman boss battle. You could also unlock Tails in this game, and both characters had a spin dash ability. I gotta say, I definitely love the art style of this game, but let's move on to the next one. The next game on the list is Candy Crush Saga, which is a match 3 puzzle game, and they did a Sonic Movie 2 collab back in March of 2022 that ran until April 2022. There was an exclusive Sonic badge that was also obtainable by completing one of 2 Sonic themed events. As far as the gameplay goes, very simple puzzle game, just match up some of the colors and then you'll get some extra points. Kind of hard to tell that it was a Sonic themed event in the first place. The next game on the list is KartRider Rush Plus. This was a mobile kart racing game that did a pretty extensive Sonic collab with tons of Sonic merch that you could collect. But not only could you collect Sonic merch for your characters, you could actually unlock the physical Sonic characters to play as. Obviously, you could play as Sonic, but you could also play as Shadow. You could also play as Knuckles in this game. Tails was also a playable character in the game. Chow were also playable characters, and even Dr. Eggman. I think the coolest part is the fact that the characters in the races can actually run around. Because did it ever make sense that they stuffed the Sonic characters in racing cars despite the fact that they're all super fast? Similar to how this game does it, picture this. Imagine a Sonic racing game where the characters are running around on foot instead of going on race carts and trying to emulate Mario Kart. Oh wait, they already did that? Well, this is awkward.